So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our Adoption UK webinar on life journey work with Philippa Williams. We're looking at this aspect of today from a webinar format, so we can't see you, we can't hear you. Don't worry if there's noise or distractions around you. It's also been recorded and I'll upload it by tomorrow, so you can visit that on the Adoption UK website if it's something you need to revisit at a later point. Please feel free to join in with the Q&A and I'll address those with Philippa afterwards, and I'll do it in an anonymous fashion. So don't worry about asking anything that you feel might identify yourself. We won't share any personal details. So thank you very much for your time, Philippa, this morning. I'll still be here, but I'll switch my camera off and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. So I hope you can hear me okay. I'm sure you'll put it in the chat if you can't. My name is Philippa. I am the Learning and Development Manager at Adoption UK in Wales. And I am here to talk to you about how life journey work is a marathon, not a sprint, from a practitioner and a professional point of view, but also I'm an adopter myself. Our adopted children are now in their 20s. So some of what I share, with their permission, I have to stress, is about them, and some of it is more general. So I've got some PowerPoint slides that I'm going to be using, and I just wanted to explain that this life journey work is a never-ending journey. These are photos that I'm sharing with permission of the final picnic that we had to say goodbye to the many siblings and foster children that our daughter was involved in. And this was 20 years ago now. So this was a picnic to say goodbye to them all. And my hair is an awful lot grayer there now than it is there. But that was the start of our never-ending journey. So what you can expect today is at the end, you can ask any awkward questions. I've got all sorts of resources on the desk next to me that as I go along, I'll share with you, or maybe when we come to questions, there might be something that I feel is relevant. And I want you to leave at 2 o'clock feeling maybe slightly better equipped, more comfortable about sharing your child's life journey with them. But I also want to remind you that we're all just parents, and some days we need to completely forget that our children are adopted and just enjoy the moment. We've got half term coming up in Wales next week. Don't feel, oh gosh, it's half term, I really promised I'd start doing some life journey work, I better do it. Just if it comes up, do it, deal with it, enjoy half term. So why do we do life journey work? As it says on this slide, our children, in order to function as good enough, adjusted young people, they need to be able to make sense of their past, understand where they are now, and how they can take their previous experience into the future with them as they become young people and adults. We do it to support their self-esteem, give them a sense of identity, and in particular, not feel embarrassed or ashamed about where they come from, and not feel it's my fault. I must have done something. There must be something wrong with me why I can't live with my birth parents. We want to give them a sense of belonging to our families, but also that you were part of another family biologically, genetically, and that's okay. And yes, it's going to crop up throughout your life, where you may be at the doctor's surgery and somebody uses, sadly, the wrong surname. You may, as an adult, be asked, was there a certain health condition in your family? So if we start sharing our children's life journey with them from as young an age as possible, in an age and stage appropriate way, they will grow up, hopefully, with a good sense of identity, good sense of self-esteem, and it will benefit their mental health. So I just wanted to tell you, in terms of the law, it is our responsibility as parents to give the children that we have adopted the information that's provided by their birth families. We need to keep it safe, and the agencies who hold the information until our children are 18 need to keep it safe as well. We need to provide that information to adopted children and adults at a time and in a manner that reflects their age and understanding, as well as the difficult nature of a lot of the information that is held about them. So, for example, one of my children, one of their birth parents died in horrific circumstances, and we had to drip feed from a very early age that this parent is no longer alive, and so that by the time our child was 18 and could go to social services and ask for his records, he was aware that he was going to be reading about some really challenging stuff. So it is our duty to keep things safe, but it's also our duty to share what we know, what we've read with our children in an age and stage appropriate way. So that was our responsibilities. In terms of what we as parents and our adopted children are entitled to, the statutory requirements are quite brief. By the time of the secondary review of our child's placement with us, the life journey book should be completed. By the time within 10 days of the adoption ceremony, then we should have that book and a later life letter for our children. Now, if I was doing this as training and I could see all your faces, I'd be asking for a show of hands. Who's got their life journey book and later life letter, and who had it by the ceremony or 10 days after the ceremony to celebrate your child being placed to you? And I'm imagining that not everyone's hands would go up. If you're an adopter waiting for a child to be placed, then this slide is really important for you. Start diplomatically asking the child's social worker, is this information going to be ready? Is there anything I can do? I've got a sight difficulty, so can you put it in large print? Can you make sure there's lots of pictures? You can participate straight away in forming the life journey book and the letter in a way that's going to be acceptable to you as a parent to share with your child. The other things you should have within 10 days of the ceremony are possibly a memory box, some photos, anything that the adopter has that belongs, sorry, the foster carer has that belongs to your child. So, as well as those statutory life journey books and later life letters, you will also get the child's adoption report, and that's where a lot of the warts and all information that will inform the way you gradually share your child's story with them will be held. You're not going to be reading out from the adoption report to a 3 or 4 year old, but you can use that to prepare a coherent narrative for your child in a way that is gradually giving them information. If you think about a jigsaw, when a child is very little, they may have a jigsaw that's 10 pieces. You had a birth mother who lived in, I don't know, lived near a river. You had a birth father who didn't live with your mother. When you're older, we'll be able to give you more information about them. Just chunky pieces, 10 pieces. When your child is 5 or 6 years old, there may be 25 pieces. When they're 10, 100 pieces. When they're a teenager, 500. When they hit 18, become an adult, 1,000 pieces. But by gradually feeding our story to our children, we are going to be moving from that 10-piece jigsaw to that 1,000-piece jigsaw, and in a way that our children can accept. Family history, so information that the child social worker has on the family, that a lot of it will be in the child's adoption report, but there may be other information from meetings that they've had, coincidental information. Oh, you know, when your child twists their hair like that, the birth mother did that. She had the same habit. Oh, that music that your child loves and the way they dance around to music, their birth father was really into music. So information that isn't necessarily included in written reports is like gold dust, and the more of it you can get, the better. So my son, we know because the social worker told us, not because it's written anywhere, that his mother could have been a professional singer. She was so good. So we always say to him, we haven't got musical bones in our body, but your birth mother did, and that's where you have got the gift, your musical gifts from. The foster carer is another sort of really rich information about your child. When we talk about foster carer records, that is not the daily recordings that a foster carer makes. Those are not something that we're entitled to. I'm talking more about, they might have kept a diary, they might have kept photo albums, those sorts of things, but not the daily recordings. A memory box, and I'll talk to you about memory boxes in more detail shortly. And photo albums, that might be, hopefully you will get photos. I have got various photo albums. I have got scrapbooks. I've got a photo album that I thought was a life journey book. So 20 years ago, before I got involved in working in fostering and adoption, I was quite naive. We didn't have the life journey work training and support that we have now. And I was given this photo album of the most beautiful photos of my daughter. And I thought that was a life journey book. I look at it now and yeah, the photos are lovely, but I have not got a clue who gave her that crocheted bonnet, who gave her that teddy she's cuddling, how old was she in that photo? Because yes, it's a beautiful photo album, but the photos aren't labelled. And I didn't think at the time to say to the foster carer, can you do some notes? Because I'm going to forget. If you tell me, I'll forget. If you write it down, I'll remember. So those are the materials that we should have for our children going forward. The life journey book, so this statutory requirement that the child social workers is responsible for, needs to be written at in a way that meets the child's developmental needs as they are now. So not for a 10-year-old, not for a 15-year-old. If your child was age 3 when they were placed, then it needs to be written as if it's being written for a 3-year-old. It needs to provide answers to the questions the child may have in the future about their early life experiences. And it is the social worker's responsibility to prepare those books. But, and this is a really important but, it is our responsibility to adapt and build on those books. So we need the bare bones. We do need that information from social services, but we do have a duty to adapt it in a way that we feel comfortable sharing with our child, that we build on using the information from photos, from foster carers, from memory boxes. That is our responsibility. So what I find is that often social workers give the task of preparing life journey books to student social workers who are given a pile of records about the child, who might have a quick chat with the social worker who's handed over to the student, and then they're asked, go and do a life journey book. And a lot of these students prepare the most attractive life journey books with lots of stickers. They'll go to the works and buy scrapbooks. But often they haven't ever met the child or the birth parents. So what's in the book can feel superficial and not come alive for our children. And that's where we come in terms of adapting it and building on that basic information. But if we haven't got the basic information in the first place, then we are scuppered. So the later life letter. This is the other statutory document that we are supposed to be given. And this, unlike the life journey book, which is written for the child the age they are now, the later life letter is more the warts and all information that will need to be shared with a child during adolescence. So I've got a later life letter example that I can share some with you. And it's a letter from a social worker to an adolescent. And I'll just read out a couple of paragraphs from it to give you a feel for a later life letter. So let's call it the young person, Julie. Dear Julie, do you remember me? I know that I don't know you now, but this letter is really about my time from when I worked with you, when I was your social worker. Before we go any further, I need to let you know that there may be information in this letter about your past that you hadn't known before. So you might want to ask someone to be with you, or make sure there's someone there to talk to you before you read on. You don't need to read it all in one go. You might want to stop and have a break, or save some for another day. When I wrote this letter, you were 6 and I'd known you for 2 years. I'm guessing you're about 13 now and might have more questions about why you don't live with your birth parents. Hopefully this letter might help. I first got to know you because a neighbour contacted social services worried that you weren't getting looked after properly. And I was the worker that came out after the call to see what was happening and what the worries were. One of the worries we'd been told was that the house was cold and dark and very dirty. When Sandra and Bill invited me in, I could see this was true. There were also many dangerous things lying around, such as broken bottles and dog poo and other things that weren't safe and could cause you harm. Remember, there's no rush to read this all at once. You might want to take a break now. The staff from Family Matters had helped Sandra and Bill to make their house cleaner and safer, but after a few weeks, the house was in the same mess as it had been before. Sandra and Bill would try and play with you. You liked to pretend they were lions trying to catch you, and you'd put them to sleep with your magic wand. One day when I was in the office, one of your neighbours phoned to tell us that she thought you were at home alone. We went to the house with the police and found you were snuggled up to the dog, alone, scared and upset. We found out Bill had been arrested for stealing money for drugs, and Sandra was across the road with her friends drinking in the park. You were very hungry and thirsty, so we went to McDonald's, as there's no food in the house and only water from the tap to drink. So it goes on in that format. And it goes on to describe the family finding process, foster care, but that gives you a taste of what might be in a later life letter. Family history information, this is the sort of information that you need to be receiving. If you're not receiving it, press for it. So information about the child's birth, I never know, can people see me at the moment or not? Because I've got things I can flash in front of my camera, but I'm not sure whether you can see me. So maybe I'll do that later when I turn my camera off. Turn my PowerPoint off. But information about the child's birth, I'm very lucky, I've got the red book for both my children. Sadly, I've only got the little bracelet that a baby is given when they're born for one of my children. And so I know how much that child weighed and what time they were born. But of course, it was the other child who really wanted that information that I couldn't provide. And when I went to social services, I felt embarrassed that I'm going to take up your time now. I need to know, how much did my child weigh and what time were they born? And they said, well, we could look in our records, but we need to get them out of the archives and that will take months. Or you can phone the NHS and you need to pay £30 and they'll dig around in their records and that could take months. And I'm dealing with this young person who at 15, for his 15th birthday, he wanted to know, what time was I born and how much did I weigh? Not earth-shattering information. So for those of you earlier in your journey, find it out now. No, don't wait till they're 15 like I did. I'm not going to read out everything on this slide, but this is the sort of information that you are entitled to and you should be asking for. And I went that bit about photos. Please label the photos. I've got a photo of my daughter sitting on someone's lap who I thought was her birth mother. And I thought, my gosh, she looks really young, because I know she had 5 children before she had our daughter. But I thought I'd been told at the time it was the birth mother. It wasn't till years later I found out it was her oldest sister. So please ask now, early in your journey. Oops, sorry. Okay, records from foster carers, I've mentioned those already. Photo albums, label them. If you're given loose photos, stick them in albums yourself. Memory boxes. I didn't have a memory box for my daughter. I had 7 bin bags full of stuff that, to me, a lot of it in my head was tat. But it wasn't tat. It was precious things that her brothers and sisters, parents and grandparents had given her. And I couldn't keep 7 bin bags full. But I chose things carefully from those bin bags, and I transferred them into more appropriate containers, and I labeled them, and I laminated the labels, and I wrote dates and who'd given it to her, because I knew I'd forget. And something else we did, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen a moment. Okay. I wanted to just show you, I talked about adapting things, and I'm going to show you one of the ways we adapted our daughter's life journey work was using a poem. The poem is called, hang on, let me just get my materials out in front of me. The poem is called My Magic Box. Can somebody just put in the Q&A if you can see my camera, because I do need you to see this. Yes, brilliant. Okay, thank you. Right, so I talk about adapting things that we were given, getting young people to talk about their journey. So rather than just us throwing information at them, we need to find ways of getting our children to talk about their journeys, ask us difficult questions. So our daughter has got a learning disability. She's in her 20s now. I would say she's now more like a 14-year-old. But very early on in our journey, we came up with this magic box idea. And this is our daughter's magic box. And there is a poem by Kit Wright called My Magic Box. And with our daughter, we adapted that poem to suit her journey and just to generate discussion about her journey. So she was a really girly girl. This is what she wanted to put in her magic box. So here's her version of the poem. I will put in my magic box a sprinkle of fairy dust. My dreams tied up in pink ribbon. And we've typed them out together. I dream about spending Christmas with my family, happy times with my grandmother, picnics on the beach. My memories wrapped up in green tissue, and you can see this tissue is looking a bit dog-eared now. Her memories include photos. It's one of Princess Diana here, that she remembers us talking about Princess Diana. An old-fashioned phone. It wasn't an old-fashioned phone in those days. I put a memory in there. I remember getting a telephone call to say you were on your way. I remember having my photo taken in Scotland with my baby brother. So my memories wrapped up in green tissue. The sound of music. This is one of our family traditions, ringing these little bells every Christmas Eve outside the front door. She wanted those in there. A galaxy of stars. A precious stone. A heart-shaped stone. This is one of our transitional objects that we used for many years when she was nervous about leaving us and having to go to school. My hopes printed out on my heart, and we just cut out some hearts, coloured them in. I hope Bryony's nan will feel better soon and come home from hospital. Well, Bryony's nan has been gone a long, long time now. I hope I'll be able to see my friend Lydia next year. And I put on, my hope was that my children will live happy and independent lives. Some magic words. These are just the words that you put the magnetic words that you'd stick on the fridge maybe, and these were great for generating discussion. So we've got mum, 13. Here, how, new, over, about, then, home, where, July. My daughter and I all know the significance of some of those words. And every time we do the box, we talk about something different using those words. I will put in my magic box tickets to far away places. These are just tickets to Barry Island on the train. It's not that far away from us, but it has special significance, and they are faded now. Me and my daughter know it says Barry Island on them. Nobody else would. I'll put in my magic box the taste of summer. A flurry of feathers. A bright, shining light. It was a bright, shining light. It was a Barbie torch. It doesn't work anymore, but there's all sorts of stories behind this torch. I'll put in my magic box jewels that I treasure. Some of these were given to her by her birth brothers and sisters. This one was made for her by our adopted son. They're not birth relatives, and a couple of the letters are missing now, but it got huge significance for her. I will put in my magic box a whisper of wishes. My key to the future. And I will keep my magic box forever. And that is just our way of sharing the story. When my daughter sees me doing life journey training and she sees the box come out, we very often end up talking about something that's part of her life journey. It's a great way of keeping the conversation going. So I'm going to go back to sharing the remaining slides now. Okay, so I just wanted to talk briefly about ways we can get children talking. It's not just about having a book that we read from. So these mats that you can get from IKEA, other stores are available. You may want to talk about the different places your child has lived with them. And when they're little, you might use a visual illustration like this. So you could talk about you were born in this hospital over here, and then you went to live with your birth parents who worked on the fair. So you lived with them over here. And then you had to go to the police station, which was over here. And then you went into foster care over here. And then you went back to the hospital. And then you went to another foster carers. And you can use illustrations like this. Or you may, Richard Rose, who is if you know anything about life journey work, he does a lot of work that's very relevant. And he published a book called Innovative Therapeutic Life Story Work. He talks about laying out pieces of wallpaper or big sheets of flip chart paper and getting the child to draw and work out, okay, so this was the hospital where you were born and you stayed there for 2 weeks. So 2 weeks looks like that. And then you went home to your birth family for 4 weeks. So let's draw the house where they are. And then you went to the foster care and you lived there for a year. So that on these bits of paper, we'll draw them that far apart. And now you've been in your adoptive family for a year, which is this far apart. So it helps children understand their journey in an age and stage appropriate way. Another way of doing that is using parallel stories. So stories in the third person. These are the sorts of stories we would share with children at a very, very young age. One of our colleagues and his family have published a book called The Blanket Bears. And this is a story about a couple of bears who can't live with their parent bears for various reasons. And Tilly the fox, who actually represents a social worker, Tilly comes and sees these little bears who coping very well at home, and Tilly phones some foster bears called Bailey and Nico, and the little bears go and live with Bailey and Nico while Tilly is looking for a forever family for them. So it's this sort of story in the third person. We call them parallel stories. You can be sharing these with children very young. Other examples are, I love this one, We Belong Together, which is by Todd Parr. We have got Paddington. My daughter's one was Paddington. We used to share that with her a lot. So stories in the third person that are opening the conversation, so that as your child gets older, they can say, do you know what? Did we have a Tilly? Was I like Paddington? And we've got to start somewhere. You may also, as well as reading stories, you may think of films. So there's a great book called Adoption at the Movies by Addison Cooper, which looks at 365 different movies and how we can use those to generate conversations with our children about adoption. And when my kids were little, Superman was the one my son loved. That was how we would have many a conversation starter when we watched Superman over and over again. For our daughter, it was Jacqueline Wilson's books and the TV series. And I know a lot of people don't like that, but we've got to go with what our children find acceptable as a way of opening discussions about their stories. Music. We used to listen to a song by the Rugrats called, it was from Rugrats in Paris, and it was, I want a mum who'll love me forever. I want a mum who'll love me whatever. And that has been the theme song that our son comes back to, even as a 20-odd-year-old. We still have conversations about that song. So there's many ways as children get older that we can use parallel stories. Sadly, we also need to think about really difficult information and how we share that with them. And again, we can't sugarcoat some really difficult information. So as early as possible, we need to start having conversations that may use the word drugs, alcohol, neglect. I'm not going to read all of these out to you. I'll just read this first one about drugs. When people use drugs, they get lots of different feelings. Sometimes they're happy and sometimes they're sad. Sometimes they're angry. Sometimes they're worried. It's hard for children living with a birth mummy on drugs, as they don't know what their birth mummy is going to be like. They might get ignored or shouted at, even if they haven't done anything wrong. Taking drugs can be a bit like taking the wrong medicine, and it makes you ill instead of making you better. Do you remember when we gave you Calpol and actually you needed medicine for a bad tummy, and the Calpol just made your tummy worse? So drugs can stop a grown-up being themselves and making the right choices. They didn't help your birth mummy behave in a way that was safe for you. So there are, if I were you, I would suggest, if you've got really difficult stories to share with your children, go to your post-adoption support service, ask them for advice. Have they got any examples of publications of scripts that you can use to explain the most difficult information? At Adoption UK in Wales, we have got a document we use with difficult stories in terms of non-accidental injury, grief, suicide, drug and alcohol use, sexual abuse. We do have to start sharing these stories as early as possible. So with my son, we had to share that one of his birth family members was homeless, had lived in hostels, supplied drugs. And then by the time he was 15 and he was doing his GCSEs, and we sat outside the school gate in the car waiting for him to go in, and he turned to me and he said, "Mum, was my mother a prostitute?" But because we'd fed information gradually, I was able to say, "Do you know what? I wondered when you would ask me that question." Yes, she was. She's not now. She's turned her life around. And when you're 18, you may well want to get in touch with her. But if we don't drip feed the story, So that sort of shocking information, if it comes in a later life letter, is going to be really difficult for children. And that leads into this quote here. I was taken into care. This is a young person. I was taken into care at the age of 2 because my birth mother cared more about smack than she did about me. My brother could tell social services how to shoot up gear by the time he was 6 because my mother had done it in front of us. Didn't exactly give me the best start in life. Then I struggled with bullies in school till I was 12. People made fun of me because I was adopted and because I was fat. I didn't find out properly that I was adopted till I was 12, when I found all the paperwork from the courts and letters from my birth mother and brothers for my birthdays and Christmas. I felt betrayed that they'd been hidden from me. I lost it not long after that. Now think back to that slide at the beginning that said we have to keep things safe, but we also have to share it. The young man who wrote this is my son's brother, who was adopted by another family. He put this on social media, on a public arena where everyone could see it. And my son was one of the brothers who had written every birthday and Christmas to his brother, and his adopted parents hadn't shared any of the information. I'm not saying that you need to get those letters out and read them to the child word for word, but saying to your child, you've had a letterbox letter. This has happened since last year. Your birth parents have, I don't know, been on holiday to Butlins. You need to share the information. Okay, I'm conscious I want to make sure you've got some time for questions. So I'm just going to go over 10 top tips in terms of life journey work for adopters. We need to show our children that their birth family are on our minds, because they're going to be on our children's minds. And if we don't talk to them about it, they're going to feel this is something I need to keep a secret, something I'm ashamed, something I'm embarrassed about. We need to tell the truth and tell it often, not deciding, right, it's half term, every half term I'm going to talk about it. It needs to come naturally. You don't know when it's going to happen. So you need to just think, yeah, that's how I'm going to deal with it when it comes up. But you do also need to find opportunities, maybe through movies, through books, to bring the topic up if it isn't brought up by your child. It needs to be age appropriate. Don't wait until they ask. Use your book, your later life letter, and your letterbox contact. Be aware of triggers. So certain smells, the smell of chicken cooking. I still don't know to this day why my son finds that really triggering, but he doesn't like the smell of chicken cooking. It might be a building you drive past, which may be where your child had their final contact, and you may not know, or you may have forgotten. So be mindful of triggers. Read books about adoption to your children. With older children, be aware that eye contact when you're sharing difficult information can make things even more difficult. So we often talk about having those conversations when you're driving somewhere and you have got their full attention, but you don't need to have eye contact. Teach your child how to respond to questions about adoption. So we don't want them to think their story is a secret, a dirty little secret. But some information is private. You don't go into school and tell all your friends in school what colour underwear your mother has on when she was going to the bathroom. There are certain things about your adoption that is your information. It's private. You don't want to share it with everyone, because once you've told them, you can't untell them. And finally, if you can find groups where your adopted children can speak to other adopted children about how they feel, what it's like growing up with two families. In Wales, we're very lucky. We've got groups all over Wales called Connected, where my daughter still goes now in her 20s to one of these groups. So, final slide. That one you saw at the beginning, where I talked about the never-ending journey and saying goodbye to those young people. I thought we would never see them again. I plastered a smile on my face. I was sad for all those children who I thought would never see one another again. But they did. And here they are. This is my daughter with her brothers and sisters, some of them. And since these photos were taken, she's also met her birth father. I wouldn't let her see him without another adult with her, and that's usually me or one of her sisters. And it also, sadly, she won't be meeting her birth mother. Her brothers and sisters have all said, they're all older than her, and they've said it's not safe. We don't want you to meet her. She is still a significant risk. But who knows, in 20 years' time, where that journey will take us next. Okay. That's me done. Questions?
Thank you so much, Philippa. Thank you for that. We do have a couple of questions that we'll get started with, if that's okay with you.
Mm-hmm.
So the first question, I'm guessing, is from a prospective adopter or somebody very early on the journey. I feel a bit silly asking this, but does doing the life story work make you feel like they're not quite your kids? It's something that's worrying them?
You know what, it's great for me 20 years on to be quite blasé about it. Yeah, when we first had our children placed with us, I just wanted to be like all my friends and turn up at the school gate and not be different. But if I could give one bit of advice, it's you have to get over those feelings. Talk to other adopters further along in their journey, because yes, I can understand those feelings, and I felt like I like that. But in order to bring our children up with good self-esteem, good mental health, a coherent narrative, we do need to do it and cope with our own feelings. So talk to other adopters, go to adoption support groups. There's community groups online that Adoption UK in England runs. Please don't be alone in those feelings. Yeah, you will feel like that.
Yeah,
it's
good
natural.
Advice. Yeah, it does early on. Next question. So their son was from a concealed pregnancy. He has 3 birth siblings who are with mum in the family home. They don't know how to start an honest conversation about it and skirt around it.
Again, I think some of those books that I talked about earlier, the blanket biz, for example, you could use this as a basis for, at that time, when you were born, your birth parents weren't able to change quick enough to look after you. And it wasn't safe, because little babies need to be looked after straight away, not when someone's well enough to do it. So my son has got a sibling who stayed at home, and we did exactly that conversation about your mum couldn't get changed quick enough. She wanted to change. She was making bad choices. I mean, we speak about her as a mum, but you need to think of what word you want to use. It might be first family, first mother, birth mother, tummy mummy. Think about what words you're going to feel comfortable with.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. We've had a request to put the slide of the resources back up again. I can forward those, if that's right with you, Philippa, to everyone who's registered for today. So you'll get those.
No worries. Yeah.
Another question. Their big struggle with life story work is missing information. Birth father is unknown, and they struggle with how to approach that.
Yeah. So if a birth parent is unknown, then having conversations around, I wonder if you get your ability to sing from a birth parent, or that thing you do with your eye. I bet your dad, your birth father, does that. So trying to think of things that you can help your child feel, I have got that genetically from a birth parent. And of course these air hunter programs and these TV programs where they can do all sorts of things with DNA, who knows? I think we also need to start preparing our children for one day, who knows what science might help us discover. But again, that's a difficult story, and when we run our full training here in Wales, we do talk about how to share that sort of information with children, and your post-adoption support service should be able to do that. So on, go on. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. So this family have got 3 children who joined them through adoption. They are 10, 7 and 2. They have very different stories and levels of letterbox contact. Any tips on supporting with those differences, as there is some jealousy?
There is jealousy. So if there is jealousy, then let me have a think about that one. Again, I think using this book, Adoption at the Movies, there may be there's what's that film that's recently come out? Oh my gosh, for teenagers. Oh gosh, something family.
Instant Family.
Infants Family. Yeah, I think some of those children they were from different backgrounds. I think you need to, particularly with the youngest one, have a narrative that you need to tell the truth, that the judge made an agreement with your family that letters have to come at this time. But for your 7-year-old brother's birth family, this is what the judge said. And for the 10-year-old, this is what the judge said. And you need to start preparing them for in the future. Social media, your family members may try and contact you, and it's our job to keep you safe. So that's why everybody leaves their phones downstairs on charge when we go to bed. And that's why we'll always be saying to you, have you anybody messaged you, anybody you don't know, not just because they're adopted, but because we need to keep our children safe from being groomed and whatnot. I think we have to get over our own fears about it. So both my children had really different backgrounds, and I used to panic about jealousy. And because my daughter had so much, she had 7 bin bags full of stuff. My son had 1 at baby grow. So my feelings about it were, I really worried. But actually when I overheard them talking one day, and they said, do you know what? We got 14 brothers and sisters between us. And I thought, why am I panicking? So that's their normal, is that she's got more brothers and sisters than me, and she has letters and I don't. And I've got a baby grow and she's got 7 bin bags, but it was all that stuff in the bin bags wasn't wonderful. So I think we need to get over our own feelings. I don't know whether that's helpful at all.
Yeah, and I think also as an adoptive parent, realising you're not going to be able to solve all of their issues. You just have to be next to them while they work through it. And it's a parental urge, isn't it, to be able to heal all these feelings, but you're not going to be able to do it all the time. Do you give the child the life story book, or do you look after it and go through it together?
It varies. It varies. Some families I work with, it's in the child's bedroom and they can look at it whenever they want. If you're going to do that, please keep a copy, because there are going to be times during your child's life when they might want to tear something out of it and shred it, throw it. I'm speaking from experience here. If it's written in a way that you feel comfortable with, then by all means share it as a book. My daughter didn't have a life journey book until she was 19. And when she did, it was photocopied from one of her brothers who we made contact with when she hit 18. And it's written, it was written for him when he was 11. So it's written in the format that an 11-year-old with a learning disability could access. I wouldn't share that with her even now, because some of the information is wrong. Her birth date is in there and it's wrong. And that shows that, well, how much was I valued if if the social worker couldn't even get my birth date right? So you need to decide whether you share the book, or that one is done. Luckily, it's a ring binder and you can lift pages out. So I would lift certain pages out before I shared it with her. So I don't know whether that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you. This member, their daughter's age 11, that the development age would be 6 to 7 and with significant trauma, sees one of her half-sisters who is also adopted. She also knows about another sister who remained with birth mother under a care order. This really wobbled their daughter. Why can she say and not me? We have recently discovered that 3 half-siblings have now been removed and are being placed for adoption. Any advice given that their daughter is very vulnerable?
If they're being placed for adoption, I would imagine some conversations should be going on with social workers about what sort of contact is appropriate. It's your daughter's information. If she's got siblings who are alive, that is information your daughter is entitled to from social services, but also from yourself as part of their life journey. If the birth mother had a child that sadly if it was a stillbirth or she'd had an abortion, then that is not your child's information. You don't need to be told that. But if they're living siblings, wherever they are, it needs to be part of the life journey.
Thank you. Another question, will we ever see an official standard of information life story book that local authorities and agencies need to adhere to? Their 3 and 7-year-old siblings were given the same life story books with their name changed, and the later life letter is sugar-coated.
Ooh, I work in Wales, and we're very lucky in Wales. We have got a life journey framework. So yeah, we have got models, and we are working towards every local authority using meeting similar standards. I wouldn't say that I wouldn't want my children to have a book that had the same headings right the way through. It needs to be as personalized as each child is different. I don't know what's happening in England, but certainly in Wales, it is something that has been recognised as important. And that cutting and pasting, as adoptive parents, we need to be lobbying for how inappropriate that is. And one way I used to do that, I managed to get myself onto the MA in social work at our local university. I'd go in and do a talk every year about adoption and fostering, and it was literally the only session they had on adoption and fostering from a service user. And I would talk about, here's my daughter's life journey book, you got the date wrong, you've got someone's name wrong, you've got an address wrong, you talk about her mother used to work in catering, here's a photo of a lady working in catering. I don't want to be showing my daughter that. That's not appropriate. I want photos of her. I want the name of her dog. I don't want a photo of a lady working in catering. So there are small things we can do. And also, whenever Adopt UK asks us to get involved in lobbying, or they want us to get involved in campaigns, please do it, because we can change it for the future, if not for our own children. Oh, hello, dog.
He keeps making a guest appearance and trying to keep him quiet. So what would you suggest with your child if there is no response to letterbox, if the child knows the letter was sent?
So you've sent a letter and you haven't received
the child's aware of that, but it's not been responded to.
So that is that quote that from my son, one of my son's birth brothers, that was what happened. So when my son and his brother made contact with one another when my son reached 18, they had that conversation, and my son came back to me and said, well, what was going on? What were you doing? And we were able to say, look, we talked to you at the time. Here's the letters that you helped us write. We sent them. We did what the judge asked us to do. We would never have not done that because the judge asked us to do it. And you have to do what judges say. And it was the right thing to do. So here's the evidence that we sent it. It is also worth contacting your letterbox coordinator, because sadly, sometimes things do get mislaid. My daughter, I knew the woman who'd adopted her when my daughter was still quite young. Who'd adopted her two of her siblings. And I would contact this adopter and say, I've done my letterbox letter in plenty of time for it to reach you by Christmas. And regularly, she wouldn't get the letter till February of the next year. So I think contacting your letterbox coordinators and checking. They may then, if they're still in touch with the birth family, they may contact the birth family and say, or they may contact the other adopters involved and say, look, an agreement was made. It isn't legally binding. These agreements about letterbox contact, they're not usually legally binding. As an adopter myself, one of the best things I ever did was keep writing those letters, even though we had none back. I really strongly recommend you do that. And also talk to your letterbox coordinators about what's happening your end. And remember that some birth families, if you're expecting contact from birth families, they may need support to write letters. There are organisations that specifically help birth family members with that sort of thing. So it is worth asking, rather than just sitting there thinking, oh, we're not going to get anything.
And things can change, can't they? You can have radio silence for years and something could come out of the blue. Okay, this member, they fostered their little one from a day old, and even though he had contact with birth family, they kept everything and labelled every picture and item he was given. He is 3 now and doesn't know anything about his birth family. How do they start to let him know he has another family?
So he doesn't know anything.
So I'm guessing the contact must have ended before he was sort of had a conscious memory of it, because from the impression that I get from the question is he's not currently aware that he did have another family. despite having had lots of mementos from that time. He only had direct contact.
Okay, so I think you, as soon as possible, need to be sharing stories in the third person as a start. I use another one called Brian Bear, which is about Bob and Brenda, who argued lots, and they left Bob and Brian. Brian Bear was unable to stay with Bob and Brenda, and he went to live in another house because he got hurt and had bruises on his face. And Brian and Brenda used to say he'd fallen on his toys, but he hadn't actually fallen on his toys. The doctor said that wasn't true. And the police got involved and said that adults must have done it to Brian Bear, and adults shouldn't do that to bears. So I think you need to get in there as soon as possible. Yeah, Nutmeg gets adopted. That's another one. Somebody's mentioned here. That's a good, although it looks a bit old-fashioned, the way the story's told in there is really helpful. This is another one I really like. It's good to be different, and this isn't necessarily just about it being adopted and different. It's if a child has got a disability, they're good at maths but not good at English or whatever, that book's really helpful. But as soon as possible, you need to start sharing stories so that the child hopefully will start asking questions, and you can say, do you realize something like that happened to you?
Yeah. And that's great. You mentioned those books, because the next question was, what storybooks would you recommend on life stories to a 4-year-old? So they'd be very much similar. Yeah.
Yeah, I Paddington. Yeah, it's good to be different. We Belong Together. This one.
Yeah, that's lovely.
Yeah.
Any storybooks for a 14-year-old?
Oh, no. Interestingly, my Lem Sisse, my name is Why, not necessarily the book in itself, but talking about Lem Sisse, and the book that this is going to be a selling thing now, the book that Adopt UK is just publishing for £6.99, which has got lots of stories from famous people who were adopted or fostered. I think being able to identify with someone that you recognize from public life and that they're doing okay is really good. Yeah. Anne Frank, the difficult journey Anne Frank had. I'm just looking at my pile of books here. One that I really like, which is quite old, but yeah, I think it's still available, The Colours in Me by Bath. There's lots of short articles in there about being adopted, written by adopted children and young people. I'll just read one out from here, by an adopted young person. All I can say is your life is no different to anyone else's. Live your life as you'd expect any other person would live theirs. Be extra kind to your adoptive parents, because they're the ones that brought you into their lives and they deserve credit for that. My mum and dad say I'm special. They feel proud of me and I feel proud of them. For me, I could just sum up being adopted in a sentence. I just feel like I'm a normal kid. And that was my son who wrote that when he was about 30.
That's so nice.
Yeah, so that's that one. Yeah. I think films as well, when you get to 14 years old, a lot of the films in the Adoption at the Movies book, they're helpful. Yeah,
there's like the theme of adoption comes up so often, doesn't it, in movies? Unfortunately, this member has no photos of any of their son's siblings or birth parents. Should they request some?
You can request some. Whether you'll get any is another question. Yes, I mean, it depends on the age of the child. You could go back. Shall I say? Yeah, I am going to say it. Social media. Social workers aren't supposed to look on social media, particularly not look on Facebook, but some birth parents do put photos on social media, and that might be a way of finding photos. If you are going to search like that, you need to be really careful that you don't click any likes or friend requests by accident. But that is sometimes a way of finding photos.
Yeah, and also with that, it's probably only a matter of time before your child starts searching into social media. So forewarned is forearmed, isn't it, a lot of the time?
Yeah.
this person's son is 8 and they're not interested in looking at or talking about their life story work. Do they just accept that for now and keep it as an open conversation, or should they try and encourage him to be more interested?
I think you keep it as an open conversation. By keeping an open conversation, you are encouraging him to be more interested. It is going to come up, and it is our duty, not, as it said in those top 10 tips at the end, don't wait until you're asked. You do need to keep the conversation open, even if it's parallel stories at the moment.
Yeah, because often you tell them things and they forget, don't they, that they've been told this information.
Yeah. And I go into any events where there's other adopted young people, so that you may be able to say, do you realise all the other kids there were adopted, or do you realise that lad you were playing with?
Yeah. Another question, what is the title of the AUK storybook you mentioned? It's Bravely Being Me, and it's available to order right now, and I will forward those resources that you sent earlier. And we've got lots of messages saying thank you very much, Philippa, for sharing your time and all your knowledge with us. Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for all of you who've joined here today. I will forward those list of resources that Philippa mentioned. This is recorded. It will be online on the members resources area tomorrow if you want to revisit it or share it with anyone else in your family. So yeah, thank you very much, Philippa.